Is the bed temperature on the brand new Bambu H2C really off by 30 degrees? To find out, we're going to test the H2C and compare it against 5 other well-known printers: the Prusa Mark IV, the Geeetech Q2, Bambu H2D, Bambu X1C, and also the P2S. And we're not stopping just with a thermal camera. If and when we do find any cold spots, we're going to run warpage-prone test sprints on those spots so we know if the cold spots actually impact bed adhesion for each printer. Stick around because the results of this video are so unexpected that I had to redo the testing just to make sure they were right. Bambu is known for their attention to detail, so when I read the comments about the bed temperature varying by up to 30 degrees, I was surprised, especially considering that this printer is so similar to the H2D and the H2S. That said, the bed size is different from those two printers, which does mean that the heating elements could be different too. To do this right, I think there's a few things that we should keep in mind for our testing. And the first is, it's not the initial heating sequence that is important. What really is critical here is that the bed has enough time to heat to temperature and then also enough time to soak before the bed is actually probed. The second is that using a thermal camera during the initial heating is fine just to see how it works, but it's not accurate to use that data to compare against. I like to see how the elements are placed so we can understand the source of the heat, but the right time to take the measurement with the thermal camera is between when the bed is being probed and when the first extrusions would be placed. The third is that reflective surfaces can throw off our readings, and we'll need to be really careful with this because some build plates tend to be a little bit reflective, at least they appear to be. The fourth is that each printer has a different printable area, and we should try and match that printable area as closely as possible. The fifth is to get the readings, we're having to remove the glass tops, and in the case of Prusa, the steel top on its enclosure. And that's going to lower the chamber temperature, and then the surface of the build plate will probably cool more quickly, which will throw off the measurements by maybe 1 or 2 degrees. And the sixth is that the reading on the surface of an exposed build plate will not be exactly the same as what we should measure, or what we would measure below a printed layer. But unfortunately, I don't have a great way to get that data at this point. I was thinking about some type of probe system, but I really don't have a good idea. So my X1C is up first. We'll heat to 100 degrees, and that should give us the widest range of hot and cold zones. The test is going to be from room temperature, which is about 22 degrees Celsius right now. I will use the identical setup for each printer, making sure that we have the entire build plate in the view. I've also made sure to clean the build plate and also the top of the magnet or the bed to guarantee that we get pretty accurate readings there too. I am using the engineering spring steel build plate for this test because it has a nice matte black finish. I have drawn a box to measure out the highs and the lows and the average as well. And I've kept it in slightly from the edges to try and match the printable area. And also because the camera does make the image a little bit distorted, so I don't want to get too close and throw off those measurements. With this printer, it takes a bit over 9 minutes to reach that max temperature and then a few more minutes to settle. So that's about 14 minutes total for this printer. We're getting a maximum of 91.6 and a minimum of 75.1. The minimum is the back right corner, and we can also see that all of the corners are a little bit cooler. I took measurements near 3 other corners because that's the max, unfortunately, with this app, and I've just inset that slightly, and they range from 81 degrees to 85 degrees. We will chart every single printer so we can compare them a little bit later as well. Next up, we have the P2S, and I know this one has fast bed heating, so let's see how it looks and what kind of swings we see with this one. I'm using the identical build plate from the last test as well. Let's crank this printer up to 100 and see what happens. So after about 4 minutes, this printer has already reached 100 degrees Celsius. So this is what we need to be very careful with. It heats very quickly, but the probe does not begin for at least another 5 minutes. So now around 7 minutes, the temperature has stabilized and the readings show 97.5 for the max, 82.3 for the minimum, and the corners ranging from 89 to 92.5. This printer again has a cold back corner, but it is much closer to the number that we're looking for. Let's move on to the Bambu H2D now, and I'm a little extra curious about this one because of how big it is. So let's get this one up to 100 degrees. Again, I have a nice matte black finished build plate for this printer, And after 4.5 minutes, we are already at 100, and it is a little different than the others. We're getting a reading actually slightly over 100 already. After 7.5 minutes, we have 100.6 max, 76.8 minimum, and the minimum looks like it might be a little bit too close to the front edge, so that reading could be a tad lower than the actual, and the three corners we have 86 to 89 degrees. Interestingly, this printer went above 100 unlike the others, and the minimum temperature is very much in line with the other printers that we've tested. It's just the max that is higher. I also wanted to test the Prusa Mark IV and the Geeetech Q2, so we'll start with the Mark IVs. It is a bed slinger, but I believe that the bed heating system on this one is the same as what they're using in the Core 1. This printer uses a different setup than the other printers though, so rather than having the heat coming from below, it is instead directly below the build plate on the top of the fiberglass bed. It seems like it should do a really good job of focusing the heat to exactly where it's needed most. This one is not fast for heating, so I did have to let it sit for 12 minutes and the temperature stabilized at that point. I actually ran more tests on the Mark IVs than I was expecting, and that's because I was getting results that I did not think I would get. I thought this one would be super even, but unfortunately it wasn't. So my initial results had a high of 88.2, a minimum of 66.1. I also tested another build plate to see if that helped at all, and unfortunately it did not. So I decided to repeat the test again. So I did a much better job on the second time in positioning the rectangle to suit this printer, and the final results with this printer for the max were 88.6, 67.6 for the minimum, and the corners were pretty low as well, from 75 to 76 degrees. So regardless of the test that I ran on this printer or the build plate, it seemed to be producing very similar results, which really did surprise me. Time to test out the Q2. So this printer has very slow bed heating. I allowed the Q2 to heat for 14 minutes to get to temperature, which is getting into the range of where it would be probing. Keep in mind that we're heating to 100 degrees Celsius in this case, and the glass was off the top. So it would normally heat a little bit faster than this would be. And the heater could also be on in the case of heating the bed to 100 degrees Celsius as well, which would speed up the bed heating a little bit, but also slow down the probing sequence trigger as well. This printer only has a textured build plate, so I will run another test after this one just to see if it might make a little change in the numbers a bit. We had a max initially of 89.5, a minimum of 78.2 with the corners ranging from 82 to 85 degrees. So I didn't have a smooth build plate for this printer, so I used the Bambu engineering plate, which didn't cover everything exactly, but I think it would help at least a little bit. I let it steep for a few minutes, and we did see a difference with a max of 94, a minimum of 80.5, and the corners being 87 and 89. This one may not be perfectly accurate because it isn't a great fit, but it's good to see that the smooth plate does seem to provide a slightly different number than the textured. So it's time to check the H2C. I'm extremely curious about this one, but we do have a problem as well. I don't have a smooth plate for this printer either. So I have an idea to test this, but we'll start with the textured plate and see what it looks like. So what's interesting here is that the layout for the heating elements is different from both the P2S and the H2D, but let's see what the readings actually say. The bed gets to temperature quickly like the H2D and P2S, so again, I had to let it settle, probably for a total of 10 minutes this time. For textured, we have a max of 93.6 and a minimum of 78.1, with the corners coming in at 83.5 and 84.5. You can see the readings look a little bit staticky, so I think it's important to check the smooth plate here too. So I took the smooth plate from the H2D and I managed to install it sideways, so it's not really going to be perfect, but it should at least shed some light on whether smooth provides different values than the textured. I again let the temperature stabilize, and we have some different numbers now, a max of 97.9, a minimum of 77.1, and an average of 94.3, with the corners coming in between 88.5 and 90. The back corner came in at 77.1, but because the build plate overhangs the bed there, and it should not normally do that, that number is probably skewed down a few degrees, but we'll have to just keep that in mind when we compare the values. I did throw in one more test. I took the textured plate from the Mark IVs and I painted one half of it with some washable black kids paint. I wanted to see if covering the sheen would affect the readings that we were getting, and it looked like it was actually going to do that, at least initially, because I could see a visible line. But then after just a few minutes of settling, the difference was too small to be able to measure. So at least for Prusa's texture build plate, it does not seem to have much of an impact at all. I do think that the larger texture on the Bambu and H2D build plates are giving different readings, but that might not be as much the sheen as it is the amount of surface area exposed to chamber air, and also that it has less surface area in direct contact with the surface below, which is providing the heat. So what I did here is I have stacked values that tends to accentuate the problem. All of these numbers are away from 100 degrees Celsius. So we had max temperature away from 100, we had minimum temperature away from 100, we have the average of the entire build plate surface away from 100, and we also have 3 spots near the corners away from 100 degrees as well. So we have, with the X1C, 61.5. So overall, not terrible, not fantastic either. The next one is the P2S, performed excellent, 34.9. So that one actually performed the best out of any that I tested here. And I do put that down a little bit to the placement of the elements. If you look at the way the elements are underneath that build plate, underneath that bed, it is extremely even. And I will also say that they've done a very good job with placing the elements near the outside of that build plate, because that's more exposed to the lower temperature of the chamber. It's much more likely to cool quickly. So having the elements around that outside is going to make sure that the outside still remains fairly hot. The H2D actually performed quite well, and I only have one result for the H2D because we had the smooth build plate, 40.2. So not that far off of the P2S. The H2D, unlike all of the other ones, was able to meet and exceed 100 degrees Celsius on the maximum temperature. The Q2 textured versus the Q2 smooth did come in quite a bit different, and I put that down to the size of the texturing on those build plates. It is actually much heavier than the texturing on the Prusa textured version, and I think maybe what's happening is either the readings are off or it's staying away from the magnet below, which is the way that the heat is transferred into it. And that's probably causing some discrepancies there. So the smooth version came in much lower. It is probably 4th place overall for the smooth version, and the textured didn't perform quite as well. So now we can talk about the Mark IV's, and I have 4 measurements here. I actually tested it a total of 6 times. I don't have all of those numbers showing because there's no need to do that. I initially thought my readings were off, so I retested it, and it turns out no matter which way that I did it, I was getting pretty close to the same results. And that includes testing different build plates as well. So 87.5, 90.7, 83.5, 89.5 overall, that is the score. The biggest issue though that I ran into is the corners tended to be extremely cool. We're actually getting 34 and slightly less than 34 degrees away from 100 at those far corners there. So that is the biggest issue there. We actually, I think, will see a bit of a problem maybe during the print when we try and print near those corners. So although there was a little bit of variation, overall it stayed pretty static in those results no matter how many times that I tested it. The H2C, we tested a textured and we tested a smooth version as well. Again, just like the Q2, we got different results. You can see the drop off there as well. But the H2C actually performed better than the Q2 did. We have 56.6 for the textured, 41.6 for the smooth plate. It just came in slightly above the H2D, not quite as even as the H2D and not quite as even as the P2S. So I think we found some pretty surprising and unexpected results. When we look at the build plate and the way that it's constructed and the bed on the Mark IV's, I think we can determine why it's having that trouble. And that's because some of those areas near the edges there are very exposed. There isn't a lot of mass to retain that heat. So it probably needs a little bit of insulation under those corners or under those edges just to help with some of these values here. So I've cleaned all of the build plates for all 6 printers on both sides using detergent first. I completely dried them, and then I also cleaned the platform or the magnet below it just to make sure that's completely smooth and clean and free from any debris. Put the build plate back on, then I used isopropyl alcohol and made sure that all of the corners are perfectly clean, no residue left over whatsoever. So the test that I want to run is a 2-part test. Number 1 is going to be at the front corner here, and number 2 is going to be at the back corner there. Number 2 is going to have no adhesive on it at all. Number 1 is going to have adhesive. I'm just going to be using this glue stick, And the reason I chose to do that is because all of the printers have one thing in common, and that is that the outside corners are the coolest. It doesn't matter which printer, which brand, or anything. So that way, if we do this test and we have all of the, basically the exact same prints happening on all printers, we know it's going to be as accurate as possible. So front with glue stick, I need to apply glue stick to the front corner of each of these printers. I also have the exact same filament from the same spool, so we have the same amount of dryness and the exact identical filament on every single one of these printers that we'll be printing with, just to eliminate that possibility of the variable. I'm going to start with the Prusa because it is a little bit slower of a printer, being a bed slinger, and then I'll move on to the other ones. And there's one more thing I just remembered. I want to make sure that I do not have the auxiliary fan enabled for these prints. And the reason is because this printer doesn't have an auxiliary fan. And technically all of them are a little bit different as far as their performance, the airspeed, their proximity to the prints as well. So I want to make sure that I eliminate that variable for these particular prints. So the Prusa is furthest along, and I can start to tell inside of that brim, just where the part meets the brim, that it is starting to lift a little bit. You can see a bit of separation from the build plate there. So we'll see how long that can go without failing. Of course, there's no glue stick on that, just the brim alone. I don't normally print that way, but I think a lot of people do tend to, so I wanted to try that as well. So we have the 32 on this one, we have 31 on the H2D, 32 on the H2C, 32 on the X1C, 27.2 on the Mark IVS, and on the Q2 we have 32 degrees Celsius. Okay, so the X1C, I'm gonna have to redo this test. It is just way too hot inside there. It really needed the auxiliary fan on. You can see at the back, it's just completely mangled. So I'm going to stop this print and I'm going to redo it, and I'm going to leave the top open just a little bit so it doesn't overheat. Okay, the Prusa Mark IVS just finished, and I just want to hop in here and show you what the brim looks like now that we can get in, and you can see all the way around there it has lifted. So that print would have failed and fallen down if it wasn't for the brim, but it held on just barely. You could just see that area where it had lifted away. So still pretty impressive considering that we had pretty severe cold areas near the corners here. The one with the glue stick, no problems at all. And I have to say too, these prints actually look excellent. This was a bit of a slower print, so it had that advantage. No cooling issues here, of course, because of that. The temperature in the chamber, well, at least near the top of the chamber, maxed out at 30.1. The P2S just finished. The chamber temperature on this one actually was running a bit hot, so it had a bit of a disadvantage in that respect. It was able to just barely keep up thanks to the bigger part cooling fan that it has in there. So it just finished, no issues on the glue stick at all. And at the back, I just want to show no issues at all with lifting. Hopefully you can see that there's no very light line around the perimeter, even with that square edge. So that did a very good job. I think the even heating of the bed, or more even heating of this particular bed, helped a lot with that. The H2C is just about to finish. We are at 32 degrees for the chamber temperature. Okay, and let's take a look. Glue stick, no problem, of course. And in the back corner, no lifting on that brim either, or on that part. On any of the corners, it looks like. So good job on that one, no problem finishing. Chamber temperature, 31 degrees. No issues there with the glue stick, and very similar to the H2C. No issue with lifting at all on the brim either. And the Q2 just finished. I know we had a bit of a cooling issue with this printer in that it wanted to retain the heat in the chamber, so I had to open the top up and I had to keep the door open a little tiny bit as well. But the prints both finished, they just don't look particularly good because of that cooling. And at the back there, no lifting at all. And you can see on that one there. So a very good result at the back with no glue. Okay, the X1C finally finished. So we did have initially a problem and it was just a bit too severe. Unfortunately with cooling, you can see there, look how bad that is. So when I opened the top, propped the top open with some wood here, and I kept the door open, that was good enough. Good with the glue stick, and at the back there, you can see pretty good results as well. I don't really see any issues with lifting on this one either. And if you're curious, this is a staircase that I designed. I called it the Nowhere Stair, and it is available down in the link below if you'd like to try this one yourself. After they completely cooled, the back one fell on the P2S, the H2D, the H2C, X1C, and Mark IVS, but not on the Geeetech Q2. The Geeetech Q2 is still up right here. This is actually the next day. It did squish in a little bit more in that back corner, so that might be the reason for it. Let's actually try and get it to fall. Yeah, it will come off. Still pretty good though. You can see a fairly heavy texture on that. And the glue stick in every single case is still upright. So glue stick is still proven to work. I've had a really good success every time that I use glue stick, and I don't need to be quite as careful when I clean the build plates either. So to answer that question at the very beginning, does the H2C have a difference of 30 degrees in temperature from the highs to the lows? And the answer is yes, but only at the very beginning of the initial heating sequence. So that is not the correct time to be taking those measurements. I was getting a maximum of 20 degrees difference, but that was using the smooth build plate. When we look to the texture build plate, which actually fits the printer properly, it was 15.5 degrees difference. So it's actually in line, if not much better than the majority of the printers that we tested in this case. So initially I was kind of shocked and I wasn't sure whether I should still be recommending this printer, but after all these tests, I am still okay to be recommending this printer. It is still at the top of the list. And speaking of recommended printers, I have a very short list of my top recommended printers down there in the description below. Thank you to each of my patrons for helping to support this channel and making videos like this possible. And thank you for watching. Take care and hope to see you on the next one. And did I screw something out? Where is the fill? Oh, jeez, I did. All right, let's try that again. Now it's connected properly. Whoops.